So I was lucky, right? So built into my own intellectual formation was a teaching trajectory. And there's no doubt, I think, that if one is able, right, as they're doing their academic studies, to complement that with some type of experiential praxis within the discipline and field, I think that's so important because it's another way for us to discern whether or not that's where our gifts are needed, where we're being called. And you're right, it also builds networking and relationships that will help us in next steps of our academics or eventual employment. So for sure, I think it's important.
And so now we know a little bit about Dr. Tkacik's background, both academically and familially. I want to know a little bit more about the rigors of academics, how you go from being a student who is in love with theology, living campus life, your best life as a young adult, to applying that to a profession where you go from, I'm very affluent in this discipline, but now I have to attain a whole new skill set in teaching, which is completely different. Not everyone has that skill set of communicating, or something that's big on your teaching front is your love for your students, you're engaging, you're tending to their needs. And so how do you apply that? And also, how were you called into that? You're talking about divine providence. Go a little bit into that.
Yeah, I've been very blessed. I can honestly say there was never a day where I woke up and said, hey, I'm going to be a theologian or theology professor. I always loved Jesus. I always loved the church. I always attributed the incredible love that I mentioned earlier that came from my family as a gift from God. And I always felt the call to want to give that back to God in some way. And for me, that was through serving others and serving the church and serving His Son. And so that led me to pursue the studies, and I really loved the study of theology and philosophy. And I was a dedicated and committed student. And so pursuing graduate studies, it takes discipline and it takes focus. I was really lucky because right when one opportunity finished, a new opportunity was put before me. And so it was never like I had to intentionally make a decision to say, this is what's going to be next, or I'm pursuing to be a theologian, or I'm pursuing to be a professor. And I do attribute this to divine providence, that once one of my degrees was done, so for example, I started Auburn, I go into seminary, I have not the best experience in seminary, I return to Auburn, God brings my wife into my life. I finished my undergraduate degree at Auburn, I have a full scholarship and teaching opportunity to go get a master's in Providence, Rhode Island at Providence College. I get married to my wife. At the end of that, when I was done with my master's, a full scholarship and teaching opportunity to go and get my doctorate at Duquesne. And so God just put the stepping stones in place. My passion for theology and philosophy, my love to study it, kept me committed, but the Lord, I really see it as God's providence putting each stepping stone in place. And I will say this, not only my passion and interest in the discipline, I was really lucky that each one of these came when I was as young as I was.
Yeah.
Because in some ways, Susie and I, when we got married, we were so young, we really didn't know better, right? So one opportunity's finished, hey, here's an opportunity to go and do this. And,
yeah.
and through good fortune and scholarships and the generosity of the institutions that I had my degrees from, we were able to go and do this. And so I had my PhD when I was 25 years old.
Wow.
And because I just kept going. And so it does take discipline, it takes a passion and interest, but at the same time, I was lucky because in some ways I didn't know better, and this is the important piece too, I was able to do it as a full-time student. So after 30-something years of teaching, most of the graduate students I have, they're doing their graduate studies in addition to having full-time jobs. I was fortunate that I was able to be a full-time master's student, a full-time doctoral student. So even though I was young in my married life, in my PhD studies, and I had to balance my commitment to my wife, for the master's and the doctorate, I was a student full-time, just teaching one course for the institutions. And so that really helps too, right? Because that frees you up to have the type of time to commit to your academics. In terms of translating that type of discipline into teaching, I would say for me, it's that passion and interest in my subject wedded to a love for my students. For me, my teaching, my scholarship is my vocation. This isn't just my job, this is what God has called me to do. Mm-hmm. And of course, with my discipline, I'm sharing knowledge about God and about love, right?
Yeah.
So I'm expanding what God has given to me. And so I took my interest and passion and my discipline, my sense of call and what I wanted to do in service to God and the church, and I tried to translate that to a love for my students, sharing with my students my enthusiasm, my passion, my joy of the Lord and the discipline of theology, and trying to communicate in a way that meets them where they're at. My responsibility is, it really doesn't matter how much I know or how many degrees I have, if at the end of the day, I can't share it and present it in a way that makes a difference in the young people's lives who I'm blessed to be a part of. And I really think for me, it's been the translation of that passion, that love in relationship to students. And why I say that is, most people might be really surprised to learn that although I've been a professor for 33 years, I've never had an education course.
Wow.
I've never had any formal teaching about how to be a teacher. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, that's the academy presumes, right? Since you have the PhD, you have the terminal degree, you know something about something, they presume that you can share that with other people.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case. And so for me, even though I never woke up and said, hey, I'm going to be a teacher, I arrived there through God's providence, I believe. I've never had formal training to be a teacher. I believe that my passion and my love for my discipline, for God and for my students enables me to be a teacher that connects to my students. And then, as you teach, if you care about it, you're going to self-learn about how to be a teacher. So I've read a lot about pedagogy and teaching. The various institutions I've been at have workshops to help us learn about teaching strategies. You had me as a student, and you know that in recent years, the explosion of technology as a vehicle in teaching and during the COVID pandemic, these were ways of teaching that I was never taught and never experienced as a student. Mm-hmm. I need to learn how to use those resources and tools to be an effective teacher. And so I think for me, in addition just to taking my passion and my love, I've also tried to challenge myself to study ways and learn from effective teachers and to adapt and to pivot and include changing technologies in teaching. And then I was really, really lucky because my first full-time teaching position was back at Providence. I'd already got my master's there. My first full-time teaching position was back there when I was ABD, all but dissertation. I'm 25 years old, and I walk into an auditorium of 120 students to teach with 3 other colleagues every day, 5 days a week.
Wow.
And it's truly an interdisciplinary team taught. So you have a theologian like myself, you have a colleague from history, a colleague from philosophy, and a colleague from English or literature. And then throughout the semester, a colleague from art and music will come. So students are seeing 4 of you teach together all the time a survey of Western thought in an interdisciplinary way. And 4 days out of the week, we're in an auditorium of 120, and then 1 day a week, we take a quarter of the kids, we go one-on-one with them.
Yeah.
So I'm stepping out of my discipline oftentimes in those breakout seminars. But why that was so important for me as a teacher, I walk into this room, and here I am, 25 years old, I'm teaching in front of 3 colleagues every single day.
Wow.
And these were seasoned professors at Providence. And I was so lucky because they wanted me to be successful. And so they cared for me, they mentored me, they helped me to become a teacher. And of course, every single day in my career at Providence, who do I get to see every single day? Is 3 of my colleagues teaching. And you learn from that, what works, what doesn't, what's their strengths, what their weaknesses, what's effective, what's not. I oftentimes say to my sons, and I believe this to be true, My teaching experience in that program at Providence, called the Development of Western Civilization Program, it's their general education program. My teaching experience in that is equal to one of my degrees, because I learned from 3 experts.
Wow.
Every day of the week.
It's a great perspective.
For 10 years,
yeah.
right? Not only their discipline, their knowledge of their discipline, and how it taught me how to teach and think interdisciplinary, but I'm also watching master teachers.
Yeah.
And so, so that's for me how I took the demands of academics and translated into teaching, and along the way, some great mentors and challenging myself to improve and to learn new ways of teaching.
Well, so looking back to where you were at 25 or 23, however it may be, and a person like myself who is going through a graduate theology degree, would you recommend getting hands-on experience? I know in my undergrad experience, I have many friends who some worked, some didn't, and my recommendation was definitely try to pour into something in your field. So by the time you graduate, you've made connections, you've learned the discipline. Do you recommend that for theology students as well?
I do. You know, I was fortunate because as early as discerning seminary, I was doing summer apostolates or summer ministries with things like Catholic Charities or soup kitchens, or so even my summer jobs when I was in high school were intentional, deliberate, that had a ministerial focus.
Oh, nice.
And then of course, once my studies started, I was fortunate because the institutions I went to had a built-in, I had to teach a course as I got my studies. So I was lucky, right? So built into my own intellectual formation was a teaching trajectory. And there's no doubt, I think, that if one is able, right, as they're doing their academic studies, to complement that with some type of experiential praxis within the discipline and field, I think that's so important, because it's another way for us to discern whether or not that's where our gifts are needed, where we're being called. And you're right, it also builds networking and relationships that will help us in next steps of our academics or eventual employment. So for sure, I think it's important.
Oh, that's cool. So like you're thinking grad assistant, teaching assistant. We had this one girl who was assistant to my professor at Southeastern, where she was almost like a secretary. She followed behind him and just took notes of everything he did. And that was a cool, something for me to witness. It was really cool. And then moreover, you were talking about the terminal degree, the PhD, that say you've gotten the job, you've gone through the studying, the credentials, everything, tested you, vetted you for the position. For someone in a position like you, who there's not a bigger degree to get, there's not a double, triple PhD or something like that, do you continue to study into your discipline? Do you continue post-grad certificates or whatever it may be? And how do you go about studying, acquiring knowledge as time passes?
Absolutely. You know, as a scholar, you want to stay abreast of contemporary scholarship, but then, so that's part of it. So there's always, and of all the disciplines, right? In theology, our subject's God, right? So you're talking about the greatest mystery of mysteries. It's inexhaustible, right? I could have hundreds of lifetimes of study, and I still wouldn't know what that means, right?
Yeah.
And so, yes, it's a constant, and it's just within Christianity itself, right? My degree, my doctorate's my PhD is in Roman Catholic systematic theology, right? But you think about, I'm married to a Lutheran woman, so you think of all the Lutheran theology I've studied over the years. Taught world religions, think about Buddhism and Hinduism I've gone on to study. So I mean, it's a lifetime of study even within my own Christian faith, within my own Catholic Christian faith. That's ongoing. But then also, as your teaching demands, if I'm invited to teach a world religions course, I've got to learn more about these things. Or as I came to teach deacon candidates over the years, I've got to learn more about these things. So I'm constantly engaged in ongoing learning, study, and scholarship. And that's one of the great blessings of a university position. Because when I'm not in the classroom with students like you, there's the expectation that I'm a lifelong learner.
Yeah.
Right? I'm a lifelong study. And I love that. So, and there's always new theologians to read, new philosophers to read, new ideas to read about and to think about. And so that's part of the discipline of being a professor is to continue to cultivate that life of scholarship and study. Most of your institutions, like St. Leo and Providence, are also going to provide professional development workshops and opportunities and afford you opportunities to go. So for example, in preparing to teach a course like in world religions, Spring Hill College in Mobile, Alabama has a summer institute. I went there one summer and spent a few weeks learning about Buddhism, for example. So we do have opportunities for ongoing professional development and learning. We're members of professional societies. So for example, one of the ones I've been involved in is called the College Theology Society. And so every year there'd be an annual conference and you would engage in research and scholarship during the year and present a paper at this conference, as well as go and learn from other colleagues. So you're researching, you're presenting, you're writing articles, you're seeking out professional development opportunities like the Spring Hill opportunity. And then there are more formal certifications if you wanted to continue post-PhD. The institution values the terminal degree first and foremost. But for example, right now I'm in the process of discerning perhaps getting a certification in spiritual direction, because one of the things that's life-giving to me is the relationship piece. And so is there a way in which, beyond the classroom, if a young person is discerning vocation or additional studies or going through different challenges or periods in their spiritual life, could I improve my gifts and skills perhaps in a more formal way to be a mentor in terms of a spiritual director? There would be a different type of certification for that. So it's a combination of all those. And once you're afforded a full-time position, there is the expectation, and particularly once you receive tenure, the institution is making a lifelong commitment to you, and you in return are saying, I'm committing my life to continuing to learn, to continue to study, to continue to improve as a teacher and as a scholar, so I can give that back to the wider community. And so that's certainly an expectation of the job.